Coming up on Arirang News. Despite the ongoing walkout by doctors, South Korea is to announce how to allocate the planned expansion of admissions among medical schools nationwide. Tomorrow, President Yoon calls medical reform the government's duty to the people. President Yoon also plans to bring changes to the real estate market policies. It includes abolishing the so-called declared prices that levy higher taxes. The Summit for Democracy underway in Seoul, hosted for the first time outside the United States, focuses on the voices of young people on democracy. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. With 1 day left until the expected day for the government to announce how to allocate the planned expansion of medical school admissions, doctors are strongly voicing against it. In the meantime, 2 senior doctors have become the first to face license suspension in connection with a massive walkout by junior doctors. Our An Sung-jin leads us off.
The exact medical school enrollment quota is expected to be announced on Wednesday, further solidifying the government's decision to increase it by 2,000. Emphasizing the need to improve hospitals and small medical schools in the provinces, 80% of the medical school quota, 1,600 students, is expected to be allocated in areas outside the capital area. This will bring the total to 3,623. The biggest beneficiaries are expected to be national medical schools based outside the capital area. The government pledged to enhance them to the level of the so-called Big Five hospitals by also increasing the number of faculty. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry on Monday sent its first notifications of license suspension to 2 senior doctors. Bang Myung-ha and Kim Tae-gu are both leaders of an emergency committee at the Korea Medical Association and were given final 3-month suspension notices running from April 15th to July 14th. The ministry said Park and Kim have been supporting the walkout of junior doctors. Park says the walkout was a result of voluntary action by trainee doctors individually and that he will take legal action. Trainee doctors are also preparing to take legal action as they will also start receiving suspension notices from next Monday. Meanwhile, medical school professors from universities including Seoul National University and Yonsei University are set to submit their resignations next Monday. But during a daily briefing on Tuesday, the Health Ministry asked the professors to persuade junior doctors to return to work.
That is the right thing to do as a doctor and a professor, to make them return to the medical field instead of doing the wrong thing and following the students who irresponsibly left their patients.
The official added that the government is widely open to dialogue, to listening and making policies based on their opinions. However, the Korea Medical Association doubled down on its firm stance by urging the government to apologize for causing this emergency situation. Stating further that once the medical student quota per school is announced, it's passing the point of no return and further destroying South Korea's medical system. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And amid the prolonged standoff with junior doctors, President Yoon doubled down on the plan to expand the medical school quotas. He also noted to form a special committee for medical reform next month for dialogue. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
Calling medical reform the government's duty to the people, President Yoon said in a cabinet meeting on Tuesday that medical licenses should never be used as a tool against the people.
국민의 생명을 살리기 위해 부여된 의사 면허를 국민을 위협하고 불안하게 만드는 수단으로 사용해서는 안 됩니다.
Yoon's remarks came as South Korea now enters the 5th week of a standoff between the government and junior doctors who are protesting against the administration's plan to increase the medical school quota by 2,000 starting in 2025. Yoon also made clear that the government would not back down on its plan. The government clarified that its decision to expand the number of medical school seats was based on the minimum needed to address South Korea's swiftly aging population, grounding its decision in scientific and objective data. Additionally, the president dismissed the medical community's calls for a complete reassessment of the plan. He argued such demands won't garner public support and would hinder healthcare reform efforts.
단계적 접근이나 증원 연기로는 국민의 생명을 살리고 지역과 필수 의료 붕괴를 막는 의료 개혁을 결코 추진할 수 없습니다.
Yoon also addressed the medical community's concerns about a decline in healthcare quality with more doctors. He countered that more professionals would rather foster greater growth and enhance the overall capacity of the healthcare industry. Meanwhile, the formation of a special committee to assess medical reform was also announced at Tuesday's meeting. President Yoon said the committee will launch in April to engage doctors and experts in dialogue as the government pushes for structural improvements in the current delivery system. With the participation of doctors' groups, Yoon said he hopes constructive talks will take place rather than conflict. The president added that he will also address medical reform in his ongoing series of public policy discussions with citizens across the nation. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Speaking with citizens today, President Yoon vows to innovate the nation's capital by tackling housing costs and redeveloping old neighborhoods. In line with that, the president says he'll abolish a real estate policy linked to property taxes. Our Kim Do-yeon tells us more.
The second miracle on the Han River. That's what President Yoon Suk-yeol called his plans to innovate the nation's capital during a policy discussion with citizens on Tuesday at an art center in the city's old industrial district of Yeongdeung-pogu.
과거 한강의 기적이 대한민국 성장과 번영의 역사를 상징한다면 새롭게 일으킬 제2의 한강의 기적은 서울의 도시 혁신이 될 것입니다. 대한민국 수도 서울을 파리, 뉴욕, 런던을 넘어서는 글로벌 인류 도시로 발전시켜 국가 제도약의 발판으로 삼아야 합니다.
His plan includes changes to the nation's real estate market to tackle rising rent and the complex methods of redevelopment. Most notably, President Yoon said he will abolish a real estate policy whereby the government gradually raises its declared property values, which, he says, has meant higher punitive taxing on homeowners, leading to rising rent costs. He also said in 2 years, 100,000 small to medium-sized homes will be available for rent to provide affordable housing. For his redevelopment plan dubbed New Village Project, older, often overlooked multi-home residential buildings known as villas in Korea will be redeveloped into modern townhouses. Loan opportunities will be provided for them. Government funding will help pay for CCTV, parks, and parking lots in these areas with 10 trillion Korean won pledged over the next 10 years. That's nearly $7.5 billion US dollars.
그동안 집을 다시 짓고 싶어도 엄두조차 낼 수 없었지만 이제 몇 가구만 모여도 뉴빌 사업을 통해 깨끗한 새집과 편리한 커뮤니티 시설을 누릴 수 있습니다. 올 하반기부터 바로 시범 사업 공모를 시작하여 내년부터 본격적으로 사업에 착수할 것입니다.
He also mentioned the cultural aspect by saying that more locations are needed where artists can exhibit or perform what they've worked on, emphasizing the role of creativity from culture.
서울의 이런 문화 인프라를 강화시키는 거는 이제 서울은 경제, 금융 이런 분야로는 세계적으로 손꼽습니다. 그런데 이게 세계적인 도시가 되려고 하면 결국은 문화 인프라가 이거를 좌우합니다.
In the meantime, President Yoon said what's discussed doesn't just apply to Seoul. The new policies and infrastructure that need to be improved also go to the rest of the country. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the second day of the Summit for Democracy taking place in Seoul, highlighted was making young people's voices heard for the future of democracy, especially in the digital era. Our Kim Jong-sil was there.
The second day began with an opening ceremony under the theme Democracy for Future Generations. Government delegates and experts from around the world gathered for the opening ceremony in Seoul. One of the main coordinators for the event, East Asia Institute senior fellow Lee Suk-jung, told us why the second day was dedicated to the young.
I think the future of democracy depends on the young generations. So therefore, inviting them to speak for their own stake is very important for the resilient democracies. So in that purpose, the third summit, the overall theme is democracy for future generations.
On this day, various workshops were available to participants with themes including global democracy coalitions, politics, youth empowerment, and digital technology, among others. I'm standing in front of one of the 60 workshops or similar events taking place here at COEX on the second day. And majority of these are focused on giving a platform to young people from all over the world to speak, as they are the present and future of democracy. The third such U.S.-led summit is being held outside the U.S. for the first time this year. Thomas Garrett, the Secretary General for Community of Democracies, a partner for the U.S. government's Youth Democracy Network, sat down with Arirang News.
We're always very impressed by the role of the people, of the masses in South Korea, from things like the Candlelight Revolution. You know, we're here for the Summit of Democracy. And one of the interesting things was when this process started, the U.S. President Joe Biden said, we need champions for democracy. And I think Korea has proven that over and over, but very much proven that they are a champion for democracy with this third summit.
Secretary General Garrett added that young people are needed to revitalize democracy, especially in a time of social media that's changing the digital technology landscape. He said it is the voices of young people that are going to keep democracy alive and fresh for the next 75 years. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea's defense ministry has unveiled its core task for the year, with a prime focus on boosting defense capabilities against North Korea's evolving nuclear and missile threats. They include the launching of additional military reconnaissance satellites, as well as the deployment of a new ballistic missile. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung explains.
South Korea's defense ministry has announced 3 major tasks for this year to make the country a global pivotal state that embodies peace through strength. First, to boost the country's military, the ministry will prioritize strengthening response capabilities against North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. This will be done by advancing South Korea's space technology in the defense sector. Seoul successfully launched its first military reconnaissance satellite last December and plans to launch 2 more this year, one in April and another in November. The country will also deploy a newly developed homegrown tactical surface-to-surface missile which can precisely strike the regime's command facilities for the very first time this year. The ministry also aims to expand the scope of defense cooperation with countries that share the same values. Last year, South Korea and the U.S. established the Nuclear Consultative Group to strengthen extended deterrence against nuclear threats posed by the North. This year, the 2 sides will establish joint nuclear operation guidelines, conduct exercises and training that mimic the response to a North Korean nuclear attack, and expand the deployment of U.S. strategic assets on the peninsula. Lastly, the ministry plans to boost strategic defense capabilities through the K-defense industry. It explained that if South Korea's defense exports and production cooperation increase, a supply of Korean-made weapons and ammunition would be available from overseas. These could be utilized in times of emergency and would also generate economic growth. South Korea also said it will make efforts for the signing of the Reciprocal Defense Procurement Agreement between Seoul and Washington to help ease trade barriers for bilateral arms exports. Defense Minister Shin Won-sik said that the ministry will do its best to ensure that national defense also helps the nation's economy. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea's low birth rate and aging population are posing a threat to economic growth as the country's workforce is expected to start declining in 2028. That's according to the Korea Employment Information Service on Tuesday, saying that the economically active population would grow by around 316,000 between 2022 and 2032. This is only a tenth of the growth recorded in the previous 10 years, mainly because of an aging society where a fifth of the population is expected to be aged over 65 by 2025. The agency says while the healthcare industry is expected to boom as a result, growing online and automated services will lead to declines in the retail and manufacturing industries. And while South Korea's auto exports remained solid in February, they were unable to reach fresh highs. And production levels and eco-friendly car performance were also down. Lee Soo-jin explains.
South Korea's auto exports once again surpassed the $5 billion mark last month, but were unable to set new records. According to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, the value of car exports came to $5.2 billion in February. This, however, is a 7.8% drop compared to the previous year. The ministry said this was mostly due to fewer working days as the Lunar New Year holiday was in February this year. The base effect was also a factor as outbound shipments of cars in February 2023 rose a whopping 47% on year to record what was at the time the highest ever monthly exports. The cumulative value of auto exports so far for the first 2 months of the year stands at $11.4 billion, up 7.5% on year. The cumulative domestic sales of cars, however, fell nearly 12% on year and more than 20% for the month of February. But the ministry remains optimistic as it expects production to resume at Hyundai Motor's Ulsan and Asan plants, as well as electric vehicle subsidies to boost domestic demand. Domestic production levels last month were down 13.6% on year from fewer working days and the temporary suspension of certain vehicle production plants. Still, over 300,000 cars were produced for the 18th consecutive month. And on-year drops were also seen in exports and domestic sales of eco-friendly cars. In terms of units, slightly more than 50,000 vehicles were sold overseas, an almost 14% decrease compared to the previous year. The value of these exports came to around $1.7 billion, down 15% on year. And domestic sales of eco-friendly cars were also down in February, falling nearly 12% from a year earlier to around 40,000 units. The Trade Ministry thus plans to work with other related ministries to make changes to current regulations that will boost investment in eco-friendly cars as well as overall vehicle exports. It will also allocate 442.5 billion won, or around $330 million, to the auto R&D budget for this year to enhance the domestic auto industry's competitiveness in the global market. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Israeli forces raided Gaza's major hospital on Monday, reportedly killing over 20 gunmen. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the war for the first time in about a month. Jung Eun-ju has the latest.
Israeli troops raided the compound of Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital early on Monday, saying they killed over 20 gunmen. The Israeli military said special forces conducted the operation based on intelligence that the hospital was again being used by Hamas leaders. A spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces said troops had been instructed on the importance of operating cautiously. Palestinian health authorities, however, said the operation caused multiple casualties and led to a fire in one of the buildings. Al-Shifa, the Gaza Strip's biggest hospital before the war, is now one of the only healthcare facilities that is even partially operational in the north of the territory and is housing hundreds of displaced civilians. Hamas said in a statement the Israeli military had committed a new crime by directly targeting the hospital buildings without caring about patients, medical staff, or the displaced people. The Director General of the World Health Organization on Monday said in a post on X, formerly Twitter, that the WHO is terribly worried about the situation there and hospitals should never be battlegrounds. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in their first call since mid-February. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters on Monday that while President Biden remains committed to the goal of defeating Hamas, he communicated to the Israeli Prime Minister that a major assault on Rafah would be a mistake and would deepen anarchy in Gaza. Sullivan told reporters the two countries would have a comprehensive discussion on the way forward in Gaza. Sullivan further described the call as businesslike, but said President Biden had refuted straw man arguments put forward by the Israeli leader. Ties between Netanyahu and Biden have reportedly grown increasingly strained in recent months. 정은주, Arirang News.
In Russia, elected for a fifth term at the office, Vladimir Putin has made his victory speech, noting the occupied territory of Ukraine. His global counterparts shared mixed reactions. Lee Seung-jae reports.
In a landslide victory, Russian President Vladimir Putin won his fifth term in office. Taking over 87% of the votes, the election victory solidifies Putin's power even further, allowing him to stay in office until at least 2030. Marking the 10th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, Putin delivered his first speech since his election victory, where he called the occupied territory of Ukraine returned territory. He also noted the 4 occupied territories of Ukraine that took part in the recent presidential elections.
Regarding Novorossiya and Donbass, people who lived there during the Russian spring expressed their will to return to their family as well. Their way to the homeland was much more grave and tragic, but in the end we did it. It is a big event in the history of our country.
However, the Russian presidential election was met with heavy condemnation by the international community. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said given the fact that Putin has imprisoned his political opponents and prevented others from running against him, this election was clearly neither free nor fair. Josep Borrell, the European Union's High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security, criticized the result, describing the election as being based on repression and intimidation. The German Foreign Ministry pointed out through its social media X that Russia's fake election was neither free nor fair. Most vocal was Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who slammed Russia for pretending to hold an election. There were also claims that the election was illegal, citing issues such as the fact that transparent ballot boxes were used and that voting was conducted in 4 occupied territories in Ukraine. China, India, and North Korea offered congratulations. Meanwhile, European Union foreign ministers on Monday agreed to impose sanctions on people and organizations responsible for the death of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said that about 30 individuals and entities will be sanctioned. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, its central bank hiked its interest rates for the first time since 2007. According to local media, the Bank of Japan announced on Tuesday that it was ending its negative interest rate policy, which was at negative 0.1% to a range of 0% to 0.1%. The central bank also abolished its yield curve control policy for 10-year Japanese government bonds, which was put in place to maintain financial stability. The decision to end aggressive monetary easing policies comes amid a rise in corporate wages to their highest in 33 years, as well as continuing inflation.
With wind and rain, daytime temperatures today were slightly below the usual levels. Tomorrow will continue to be a bit chilly. Tomorrow morning, the temperature in Seoul is expected to drop to 0 degrees Celsius and the wind chill to -3. The last cold snap will be in full swing. Rain and snow will mostly subside overnight, but on the East Coast, it will continue until tomorrow afternoon. Heavy snow of more than 20 centimeters will fall in the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do Province, and up to 8 is predicted in the northeastern part of Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. As a result, a heavy snow warning has been issued in Yeongdong, Gangwon-do Province, and a heavy snow preliminary special warning has been issued in inland areas of Gangwon-do and northeastern Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at -1 degrees. Daily highs in Seoul and Chuncheon will move up to 9, Busan 13 degrees Celsius. This rain will make a return on Friday and over the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast tonight. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Good night.